Snow crashes against the windows as laughter fills the house. The mother-in-law raises her glass and says coldly, "This family deserves better," she turns, pointing at the young woman holding her child. "You failed us. You failed my son." The husband grabs her arm, dragging her toward the door. "Don't make this harder." He snaps. Her coat is thrown after her. The door slams shut. Inside, they toast Christmas. Outside, she stands barefoot in the snow, realizing her own family just erased her existence. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from, so we can bring more stories like these. Snow had been falling since late afternoon, thick and relentless, the kind that erased footprints almost as soon as they were made. By nightfall, the world outside the mansion looked quiet and beautiful, the kind of winter scene people loved to photograph from warm rooms with full glasses. Inside, the house glowed. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors. A massive Christmas tree towered in the center of the living room, decorated in gold and silver, wrapped in ribbon that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Laughter floated through the air, mixed with clinking glasses and the soft hum of classical music playing through hidden speakers. Family was celebrating, toasts were being made, stories were told. Everyone looked polished, perfect, untouched by anything as messy as hardship. She stood near the edge of the room, holding her small child close, careful not to take up too much space. She had learned that skill quickly after marrying into this family. Stay quiet, stay grateful, stay invisible. Her dress was simple, clean but modest, her hair pulled back neatly. She had chosen it carefully, hoping it would make her look like she belonged. Hoping tonight, of all nights, she wouldn't feel like an outsider. Her son rested his head against her shoulder, already half asleep. His small hands clutched the fabric of her sleeve, fingers cold despite the warmth of the house. She adjusted him gently, whispering, "It's okay, baby." Across the room, her mother-in-law watched. The woman's smile was thin, sharp around the edges. Her eyes followed every movement the young woman made, measuring, judging, cataloging flaws the way some people collected antiques. "She looks tired," the woman said loudly, not bothering to lower her voice. "Doesn't she ever sleep?" A few relatives chuckled politely. The young woman pretended not to hear. Someone else added, "Well, motherhood ages people, especially when they weren't raised for this kind of life." More laughter. Softer this time, more cruel. Her husband stood near the fireplace, drink in hand. He heard every word. He said nothing. She glanced at him, just for a second, not pleading, not demanding, just hoping. His eyes flicked away. Dinner ended and the insults became less subtle. Comments about her past, her lack of refinement, her body not bouncing back fast enough after childbirth. Each remark landed quietly, like snow piling up, light on its own, crushing when it accumulated. The mother-in-law finally stood, tapping her glass to get attention. The room hushed. She smiled broadly, the kind of smile meant for photographs and cruelty alike. "There's something we need to address before the night continues," she said. The young woman's stomach tightened. This family, the older woman continued, has standards, traditions, a reputation built over generations. She turned her gaze directly toward her. "And unfortunately," she said calmly, "not everyone is capable of upholding that." The room went silent. Her husband shifted uncomfortably. The woman's voice hardened. "We welcomed you. We gave you a chance. But it's become clear you don't belong in this family." The words hit harder than a slap. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The mother-in-law waved her hand dismissively. This was a mistake, and mistakes need to be corrected. She nodded toward the door. Her husband finally spoke. "Just go," he said quietly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Her breath caught. "What about him?" she asked, tightening her hold on their child. "He's your son." He didn't meet her eyes. "He'll survive." The mother-in-law snapped her fingers. Two men, family, staff, people who had once smiled at her, stepped forward. "Take her out," the older woman said. "Now." The young woman shook her head in disbelief. "Please," she whispered. "It's snowing. He's just a child." No one moved to help. Hands grabbed her arms, not gentle, not violent. Just firm, efficient, indifferent. She stumbled as they dragged her toward the door, her child beginning to cry, confused and frightened. "Mommy," he whimpered. "I'm here," she said desperately. "I'm right here." The front door opened and a blast of icy air rushed in, stealing her breath. They shoved her outside. The snow swallowed her shoes immediately, soaking through thin soles. The cold bit into her skin like needles. The door slammed shut. A coat flew out after her, landing in the snow at her feet. Inside, laughter resumed. Music rose again. She stood there, frozen, clutching her child as snow fell harder, blurring the world around her. The house behind her glowed warmly, completely unmoved by her absence. She looked at the door once. Twice it didn't open. Her legs trembled as reality settled in. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't temporary. This was erasure. She pulled the coat around her child, wrapping him as tightly as she could, whispering apologies through chattering teeth. "I'm sorry," she said over and over. "I'm so sorry." The snow kept falling, and in that moment, standing alone in the dark, she understood something that would change her forever. They hadn't made a mistake. They had made a choice. The snow swallowed sound the farther she walked. Each step felt heavier than the last, her legs burning as she pushed forward with her child pressed tightly against her chest. The coat wrapped around him was too big for her, too thin for the night, but it was all she had. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes, melting into her eyes, blurring the road ahead. Her phone was gone, left behind on a side table she hadn't been allowed to retrieve. Her wallet, nearly empty even before tonight, sat useless in her pocket. Every option she would have reached for in another life had been stripped away in a matter of minutes. She didn't cry at first. She focused on walking, on keeping her child warm, on breathing. Cars passed occasionally, headlights cutting through the white like sharp blades, but none slowed. Some drivers glanced at her, just long enough to register inconvenience, then kept moving. The world had places to be. She was not one of them. Her child whimpered softly, face buried into her shoulder. "I know," she whispered, lips numb. "I know, baby." Her feet began to ache, then throb, wet socks, frozen toes. She stopped briefly beneath a flickering streetlight and adjusted her grip, rocking him slightly. "It's okay," she said again, though her voice shook. "Mommy's got you." Memories came uninvited as she walked. Her first night in that house, standing in the kitchen, unsure where to put her bag. The way she'd laughed nervously when someone corrected how she folded towels. How she learned to eat less, speak less, need less because peace was fragile, and she didn't want to be the one to break it. She remembered selling her jewelry quietly, one piece at a time, always for the family, always with a smile. She remembered swallowing words when insults came dressed as jokes. She thought silence was strength. She had been wrong. The motel appeared suddenly through the snowfall. A low building with a flickering vacancy sign that felt more like a suggestion than a promise. She hurried toward it, heart lifting briefly. Inside, warmth rushed over her like a wave, making her knees weak. She approached the front desk, voice barely steady. "Please," she said, "I just need one night." The man behind the counter looked at her, then at the child, then back at her. "Cash only," he said flatly. She checked her pocket, counted bills with trembling fingers. Not enough. The man shook his head before she could speak. "Sorry." The word landed like a door slamming shut. Outside again, the cold felt worse now that she'd tasted warmth. She wandered until the road thinned and buildings disappeared. An old, abandoned structure sat near the edge of the property line. Once a storage shed, maybe. The door hung crooked. The inside smelled of dust and damp wood. She stepped inside anyway. She sank down against the wall, sliding slowly to the floor as exhaustion finally claimed her. Her child stirred, then looked up at her with wide, confused eyes. "Mommy," he whispered. Her throat tightened. She pressed her forehead against his. "I'm here." Her body shook as sobs finally came, silent at first, then uncontrollable. She wrapped her arms around him, rocking back and forth, trying to hold herself together. "I'm sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I failed you." He frowned, small hand reaching up to wipe her cheek clumsily. "Don't cry," he said softly. That broke her. She cried harder, then not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of grief that emptied her chest completely. The kind that came from realizing love alone hadn't been enough. She thought of all the moments she'd stayed quiet, all the times she'd lowered her head, believing endurance would earn her a place, believing if she absorbed enough cruelty, it would eventually stop. Instead, it had taught them she would accept anything. Her child shifted in her arms, finally drifting into restless sleep. She pulled the coat tighter around him, tucking his hands inside, rubbing his back slowly to keep him warm. The night stretched endlessly. The wind slipped through cracks in the walls. Snow piled at the doorway. Her muscles stiffened, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She stared into the darkness, mind looping through questions with no answers. Where would they go tomorrow? How would she protect him? How had she let it come to this? Shame crept in quietly. Not because she had done wrong, but because the world had convinced her survival was something to be embarrassed about. She rested her chin on her child's head, whispering words he might not hear but needed anyway. "You're safe," she said. "I promise I won't let this break us." But as dawn remained far away and the cold pressed in harder, she felt something crack inside her. Not her love, not her will, but the last illusion that silence kept people safe. This night carved something permanent into her. It took her dignity and returned it sharpened. It showed her the truth. Cruelty didn't need fists. It only needed indifference. And as she held her child through the longest hours of the night, she understood she would never again beg for belonging. She would build it herself. The knock came without warning. She was sitting on the edge of the motel bed, one she had barely managed to afford after borrowing cash from a stranger at a gas station, rocking her child gently as he slept. The room smelled of cheap cleaner and damp carpet, but it was warm, and for now, that was enough. The knock came again. Sharp, impatient, her heart jumped. She hadn't told anyone where she was. No one should have been looking for her. She stood slowly, smoothing her coat, and approached the door. Through the thin wood, she could hear muffled voices. One of them she recognized instantly. Her stomach dropped. She opened the door. Her husband stood there, snow still clinging to his boots, expression flat and irritated. as if this were an inconvenience he'd been forced to deal with. Behind him, leaning against the railing, was his mother, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. The cold didn't seem to touch her. "So this is where you ended up," the older woman said, scanning the room behind her with thinly veiled disgust. She tightened her grip on the doorframe. "What do you want?" Her husband sighed. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small ring of keys, old, scratched, heavy in a way that suggested age, not value. He dropped them into her hand. "That's your settlement," he said. She stared at the keys, confused. "What is this? An old property?" His mother replied coolly. "Something no one wanted. You should be grateful." Her husband smirked. "You wanted independence, there it is." She looked up at him slowly. "Where?" "Out past the county line," he said. "Abandoned years ago. No cash, no support, just the keys." The mother-in-law leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You always liked pretending you were strong. Let's see how far that gets you." Her child stirred behind her. "You expect me to take my son there?" she asked quietly. Her husband shrugged. "It's more than you deserve." They turned and walked away without waiting for a response. The door closed. The keys felt heavier now. Later that morning, she stood on the edge of the property they'd given her. The house looked like it had been forgotten by time. Paint peeled from the siding. Windows were clouded with grime. The yard was choked with dead grass and broken branches. The gate hung crooked, one hinge rusted through. This was their joke. This was the final insult. She carried her child up the steps, each one creaking under her weight. She paused at the door, staring at the lock. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. She inserted the key. It turned smoothly. The door opened. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust and old wood. The inside was dim but intact, bare, quiet. She stepped inside slowly. The floor didn't collapse. The walls didn't crumble. The ceiling held. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, eyes scanning the space. There was nothing welcoming about it, but there was nothing broken beyond repair either. Her child looked around sleepily. "Is this home?" he asked. The word hit her harder than any insult had. She swallowed and nodded. For now. She set her bag down and began to explore. Every room told a story of intentional neglect. Furniture covered in sheets, doors locked that shouldn't have been, cabinets sealed, a desk bolted shut. This wasn't abandonment. It was concealment. She paused in the center of the living room, keys still clutched in her hand, and felt something shift inside her. They thought this place would bury her. They thought humiliation would finish what the snow started. But as she stood there, surrounded by silence and possibility, she realized something they never expected. They had given her a door. And she was the kind of woman who didn't walk away from locked rooms. The house didn't reveal itself all at once. At first, it resisted her. Cold settled into the walls, making every room feel unwelcoming, as if the structure itself wasn't sure whether to trust her yet. Dust coated every surface, thick enough to dull the light coming through the grimy windows. Each step echoed louder than it should have, reminding her how empty the place truly was. She started with what she could control. She cleared a corner of the living room, spreading out a blanket for her child. She found an old space heater in a closet, tested it cautiously, and let herself exhale when it hummed to life. She wiped down a small table and set a single cup on it, trying to make the space feel less like a punishment and more like survival. At night, the house creaked. The sound made her flinch at first. Every groan of wood felt like a warning. She slept lightly, waking at the smallest noise, one arm wrapped protectively around her child. But with each passing day, fear slowly gave way to curiosity. She noticed things that didn't fit the story she'd been told. The plumbing worked too well for a place supposedly abandoned. The electrical panel had been updated more recently than expected. Doors that looked warped from the outside were solid and reinforced on the inside. Someone had cared about this house. Someone had planned something. While cleaning one afternoon, she discovered a door at the end of a hallway she hadn't noticed before. It was painted the same dull color as the walls, almost designed to blend in. The handle didn't turn. Locked, she stared at it longer than necessary, a familiar unease crawling up her spine. Locked doors had always meant secrets she wasn't allowed to know. She turned away, but the house had begun to speak. In a bedroom she'd been using for storage, she found a loose floorboard beneath an old rug. Beneath it was a metal box, small but heavy. Inside were documents sealed in plastic, carefully preserved. Her hands shook as she pulled them out, property records, not just for this house, but for land surrounding it. Her name appeared repeatedly, so did her child's. She sat down hard on the floor, heart pounding. This wasn't a mistake. She kept searching. In a study at the back of the house, she found a desk bolted shut. The key from the ring her husband had thrown at her slid into the lock perfectly. The drawer opened. Inside were journals, not diaries but records, dates, notes, observations written in a steady, deliberate hand. She recognized the handwriting, her father-in-law, the man who had died years ago, the one her husband rarely spoke about, the one the family described as paranoid and controlling. She opened one carefully. Page after page, detailed concerns. About loyalty, about entitlement, about how people revealed themselves when money and pressure entered the picture. Then she found the part that made her breath stop. If she is ever pushed out, one entry read, "If my grandson is ever treated as disposable, then the protections activate." Protections. Her heart raced as she flipped through more pages. Legal conditions, trust structures, property holds. Everything tied to one requirement: mistreatment. This place wasn't worthless. It was dormant, hidden. Waiting, she felt dizzy. In another sealed room, behind shelves that slid aside with careful pressure, she found filing cabinets. Inside were financial records that didn't match what her husband had claimed for years. Money that should have been there. Assets quietly transferred. Accounts drained under family authority. She realized then that this house wasn't a joke. It was a test, a safeguard. Someone had known she would be betrayed. Someone had prepared for it long before she ever walked into that family. Her chest tightened, not with triumph but grief, because buried beneath the documents and plans was one painful truth. No one had warned her. She hadn't been protected because she was trusted. She had been protected because betrayal was expected. She closed the cabinet and leaned against the wall, sliding down until she was seated on the floor. Her child peeked into the room, eyes wide. "Mommy." She pulled him close, holding him tightly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure yet what that meant. As night fell, she sat alone at the desk, journals spread out before her. The house no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for her to arrive. She looked around slowly, finally understanding. This house wasn't meant to save her from poverty. It was meant to expose truth, and whatever came next would not stay buried. She didn't go straight to revenge. She went to the place people always tell you to go when you've been wronged. The system, the first law office, sat downtown in a building that smelled like polished wood and money. She walked in wearing her simplest coat, her child's hand tucked into hers, a folder of copied documents hugged tight against her chest like a shield. Her palms were damp with nerves, but her back stayed straight. At the front desk, a receptionist glanced up, then down, then up again, eyes flicking over her the way people skim something they've already decided isn't important. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, voice polite in a way that didn't feel kind. "No," she said quietly. "I need help. It's urgent." The receptionist's smile tightened. "We're very busy right now." She slid the folder forward slightly. "I have legal documents, trust paperwork, property records." The receptionist didn't touch them. She just nodded toward a row of chairs. "Fill this out." She filled out every line carefully, name, address, phone number. She didn't even have any more circumstances. When she got to the part that asked if the opposing party had legal representation, she hesitated, then wrote the truth. Yes, she waited. A man in a suit finally stepped out and called her name. He didn't shake her hand. He didn't look at her child. He motioned her into a small office and shut the door. He flipped through her papers without emotion, as if he was sorting mail. Then his posture changed slightly, not fear, something colder, recognition. He cleared his throat. "So you were married into the Langford family." Her stomach dropped at how quickly he said it, like the name carried weight even here. "Yes," she replied. "I was, but they—" He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying," she said, voice tightening. "I was thrown out on Christmas Eve, in the snow, with my child." His eyes flicked toward her for a moment, then back to the papers. "I'm sorry," he said, and she almost believed him until he added, "but I can't represent you." Her pulse spiked. "Why not?" He placed the papers down neatly, like he was putting her back where she belonged. Conflict of interest. What conflict? She demanded. His tone remained calm, professional, practiced. "My firm has long-standing relationships with several families in this county, including the people who hurt me." She finished, her voice sharper now. He didn't deny it. "Try legal aid," he said, already standing. "They handle situations like yours." Situations like yours. She walked out with her folder clutched tighter than before, cheeks burning, not from embarrassment yet, but from the first taste of what she was up against. The next office was smaller, less polished, the kind of place that advertised family law on a faded sign. She sat across from a woman attorney who seemed warmer at first. The lawyer listened, nodded, even frowned at the right places when she described the snow, the slammed door, the way laughter continued inside. The lawyer took the folder and started reading. Then her expression changed too. Not as obvious, but it was there. She looked up slowly. "This property is tied to certain conditions." "Yes," she said quickly. "It activates if I was mistreated, and I was." The lawyer's lips pressed together. "Do you have proof of the mistreatment?" She swallowed. "I have my testimony, my child, the fact that I had frostbite on my hands, the motel receipt. A neighbor saw." The lawyer leaned back, thinking, "The Langfords will claim you left voluntarily." "I didn't," she snapped, then caught herself lowering her voice. "I didn't leave voluntarily." The lawyer nodded, sympathetic. "I believe you." Relief started to rise. Then the lawyer sighed. "But belief isn't evidence." "What about the journals?" she asked, tapping the folder. "The records in that house, They prove the family hid assets meant for my child. The lawyer flipped a page, then another, eyes moving faster. And then she said softly, I can't take this case. Her stomach sank again. Why? The lawyer hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. Because you're about to walk into something bigger than you think. That's why I need you, she pleaded, voice breaking slightly. The lawyer lowered her voice. I've seen what that family does to people who challenge them. She stared. So you're afraid? The lawyer didn't deny it either. I have staff, a practice, children, and I'm not pretending the justice system is neutral when certain names are involved. The room went quiet. The young woman's hands clenched. So what do I do? Just accept it. The lawyer slid the folder back across the desk slowly. You keep trying, she said, and there was guilt in it. But be careful, careful. That word followed her out like a shadow. Over the next week, she went everywhere she could. Legal aid had a waiting list so long it might as well have been a wall. A volunteer intake worker glanced at her file, then murmured, This is complicated. The way people say impossible, without wanting to admit it. A county office told her she needed a court order to access certain records, but she needed records to get a court order. A clerk at the courthouse looked at her paperwork, then looked at her like she was wasting oxygen. You need an attorney, the clerk said flatly. I'm trying, she replied, voice strained. The clerk shrugged. Then come back when you have one. Each door closed politely. Each rejection wore a different mask. But the message stayed the same. You don't belong here. Then the family struck back. Not loudly, strategically. She found out when a letter arrived at the abandoned property, addressed to her with the courthouse seal stamped on the front. Her hands shook as she opened it. A petition, filed by her husband, claiming she was unstable, claiming she had taken their child without permission, claiming the property was uninhabitable and she was endangering the kid. Her mouth went dry. They weren't just denying her. They were rewriting her. She showed up for the hearing anyway. She wore her cleanest clothes. She braided her hair neatly. She held her child's hand and walked into the courthouse like she belonged there. Because if she didn't act like she deserved space, the room would swallow her whole. Her husband was already inside. So was his mother. They didn't look stressed. They looked entertained. His mother wore pearls like armor. She whispered something to her son, and he smiled faintly, like this was just another business meeting. Their lawyer stood beside them, calm and confident, flipping through a polished binder. The young woman stood alone at her table. No lawyer, just her folder and her spine. The judge entered, older, stern, already looking tired. Her husband's lawyer spoke first. He didn't mention the snow. He didn't mention Christmas Eve. He didn't mention abandonment. He spoke about erratic behavior. He spoke about instability. He spoke about financial irresponsibility. He said the abandoned property was dangerous and unsanitary, and the mother was unfit for making their child live there. The words sliced through the air cleanly, dressed in professionalism. The judge nodded slowly, taking notes. When it was her turn, she stood, hands trembling but voice steady. They threw us out, she said, on Christmas Eve in heavy snow. The lawyer smiled slightly, as if she'd just said something emotional instead of factual. The judge frowned. Do you have proof of that? She swallowed hard. I have my medical discharge from that night, my motel receipt. My neighbor can testify. The lawyer interrupted smoothly. Objection, hearsay, unverified. The judge held up a hand. Ma'am, without corroborating evidence, I can't accept accusations as fact. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She opened her folder quickly, pulling out photocopies of the journals, the trust language, the conditions. "I found these," she said, laying them out. "This property was hidden. Assets were diverted. Money meant for my child." The judge glanced at the papers briefly. "Where did these come from?" "From the house they gave me as an insult." She replied, "It wasn't worthless. It was sealed. It was." Her husband's lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, this is exactly what we're talking about. She's spiraling into conspiracy. She claims hidden rooms, secret assets, journals. It's not a conspiracy." She snapped, then caught herself again, lowering her voice. "It's documentation." The judge's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, control your tone." Her cheeks burned. She looked at her husband. He wouldn't meet her gaze. His mother did, and her mother-in-law's eyes said everything. "See, nobody believes you." The hearing ended faster than it should have. The judge ruled temporarily in the family's favor regarding custody visitation and ordered an evaluation. He also placed a hold on her access to certain records, citing lack of representation and unclear chain of possession. Everything she brought in was treated like suspicion. Everything they brought in was treated like truth. She stood there as the gavel came down, feeling like she had been thrown into the snow all over again, only this time it happened under fluorescent lights, in front of strangers, with her dignity being questioned like it was evidence. Outside the courthouse, cameras were nowhere, no reporters, no headlines, no concern. The rich family walked out together, protected by their name, their lawyer, their clean narrative. She walked out alone, clutching her child's hand so tight he winced. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not sure if she was apologizing for losing or for believing the system would catch her. Her husband's mother passed her on the courthouse steps and leaned in just enough to let her words slip like poison. "You see," she murmured, "you can't win. Go back to where you came from." Then she walked away. That night, back at the old property, she sat on the floor with her folders spread out around her. The wind tapped at the windows. Her child slept in the other room, innocent to the war being fought over his life. She stared at the documents again, the journals, the records, the account trails. They were real, and yet they hadn't mattered. Not in court, not in that room. The law had closed its doors, but truth has a way of moving through cracks. It doesn't always burst in like a hero. Sometimes it leaks. A whispered conversation between staff. A copied file someone shouldn't have made. A small, careless mistake from a family that thinks it can't be touched. She didn't know it yet, sitting there in the quiet, but something had already started to slip out from under their control. And once truth is loose, it doesn't go back in the cage. The courthouse steps were wet with slush and dirty snow, the kind that used to look pretty when it first fell, but now just looked like evidence that the world had been walked on too many times. She stood there holding her child's hand, his little fingers tucked into her palm like an anchor, while the Langford family descended the steps behind their lawyer like they'd just won a round of golf. They weren't rushing. They weren't worried. They were smiling. Her mother-in-law glanced at her, then looked away like she was done acknowledging her existence. Her husband didn't even pretend to feel guilt. He walked beside his mother like a shadow, obedient, protected, empty. The lawyer said something low to them, and they laughed, right there, on the courthouse steps, in front of her. Not loud enough to be disrespectful, but loud enough for her to hear. Loud enough to make sure she knew the humiliation wasn't accidental. It was part of the victory, Her child looked up at her, confused. "Mom, why are they laughing?" She swallowed hard. "They're just talking, baby." Her mother-in-law paused for one final moment, turning just enough to deliver the last slice cleanly. "You should have stayed quiet," she said, voice calm like a compliment. "Now everyone's going to see what you really are." Then she turned away again. Something in the young woman's chest tightened, not anger like a flame, but anger like ice. She didn't scream. She didn't lunge. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, breath visible in the cold, face steady, holding her child close as if she was building a wall with her own body. And that was the moment, not because she meant it to be, because someone else saw it. A woman standing near the corner, bundled in a thick coat, had been watching the entire time. She didn't look like a reporter, just an ordinary person with a phone in her hand. She had started recording when the laughter began, because something about it felt wrong. And when she caught the scene, wealthy family descending courthouse steps, smug and untouched, while a young mother stood there in slush holding a child and swallowing humiliation like she'd been forced to do her whole life, the clip didn't look like a private tragedy anymore. It looked like a story. The mother-in-law's words weren't caught clearly, but her expression was. The husband's silence was. The lawyer's grin was. And the young woman's restraint, the way she didn't beg or perform, was the loudest part. Her child tugged her sleeve again. "Mommy," she crouched down, forcing warmth into her voice. "I'm okay. You're okay. We're okay." Her hands were trembling slightly as she adjusted his scarf. That trembling got recorded too, not weakness. Human. The Langfords stepped into their black SUV, door held open like they belonged to the world more than anyone else. The young woman turned to leave, and right as she stepped off the courthouse walkway, her heel caught on a patch of ice. She slipped, not dramatic, not like a movie, just real. Her knee hit the ground. Her child stumbled with her. She caught him before he fell, protecting him first, even as her own hands scraped the slush. The woman with the phone gasped quietly. The clip captured it all. A mother falling and still shielding her child. A family in luxury stepping into warmth without looking back. A mother-in-law glancing once, then climbing into the SUV as if the sight was beneath her. The young woman stood back up slowly, face flushed, hair slightly undone, dignity still intact because she refused to let the fall become her identity. She didn't even look at them again. She walked away. That night, the clip was posted online with a simple caption. Why did the court side with them? The person who posted it didn't add names at first. Just the video, raw and unedited. And the internet did what the courtroom wouldn't. It paid attention. The video spread fast at first. It was shared with anger. Then with questions. Who is she? Why is she alone? Why are they so smug? Did they throw her out? Why does the kid look terrified? People zoomed in on the family. Someone recognized the husband. Someone recognized the lawyer. Someone recognized the mother-in-law's face from charity galas and local business news. Then the name appeared in comments like a match to gasoline. Langford. The story shifted instantly. Because that name wasn't just wealth, it was influence. And influence doesn't like sunlight. Within hours, bigger accounts reposted the clip. Lawyers online started analyzing what they could see. Look at the power imbalance. Look at the intimidation. This is coercion. Where's the full case record? A journalist from a regional outlet saw it and started digging, not because they loved justice, but because viral stories meant clicks. Still, digging was digging. They pulled old articles about the Langfords, business awards, donations, public image. Then they found something strange. An older story buried in the archives about the father-in-law. A quiet dispute involving property trusts, mentions of sealed documents. A thread began connecting. People started asking about the abandoned property. How did she get keys? Why did they give her that? What's in that house? The young woman didn't even know the video existed at first. She was too busy trying to keep her child fed, too busy staring at the court paperwork and feeling like the world had declared her disposable. But by the next morning, her phone, an old one she'd borrowed from a neighbor, started buzzing nonstop. Messages, calls, notifications. She opened one social link someone sent her, and there she was, standing in slush, holding her child, being laughed at by people who never had to fear winter. Her breath caught. She watched herself fall, watched herself shield her child, watched herself stand back up. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, she didn't feel erased. She felt seen. Comments were pouring in. Protect this woman. Expose them. This is evil. She's so strong. The kid in my heart. This is why we don't trust the system. People weren't praising her for being perfect. They were praising her for being real. The journalist reached out by noon, then another, then a legal advocacy group, then a small nonprofit that specialized in family law cases involving power imbalances. Old witnesses began appearing like ghosts. A former housekeeper from the Langford estate anonymously messaged an account and said, "I saw her get thrown out." Someone else said they'd heard the mother-in-law bragging at a party about getting rid of her. A bank employee quietly hinted online about suspicious withdrawals linked to the family. The truth that had been trapped behind doors and judges and expensive lawyers started leaking out, exactly like it always did when power got careless. The family tried to respond quickly. A statement was released, polished, sterile, dismissive, false narratives, personal matters, unstable behavior, privacy, but it didn't work. Because the clip didn't show instability. It showed restraint. It showed cruelty dressed as class. And the public didn't just watch it. They felt it. By evening, the hashtag was trending in the region. Reporters were pulling court filings. Journalists were interviewing locals, and the Langfords, who had always moved through life like the world belonged to them, were learning a new reality. You can buy silence in a room, but you can't buy silence from millions. The young woman sat in the old property that night, her child asleep beside her, and stared at the screen as messages kept rolling in. She didn't feel victorious. She felt terrified, because attention was dangerous. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt since she walked into the Langford mansion, hoping to belong. She felt a door opening, not because the powerful wanted it open, because the crowd had kicked it, and once that door cracked, everything hidden behind it was going to spill out. Power doesn't fall all at once. It cracks. The first crack came quietly, buried beneath polite press statements and carefully chosen words. The Langford family released a formal response within 24 hours, drafted by the same legal team that had always kept them insulated. It spoke of misrepresentation, ongoing private family matters, and concern for a child's well-being. It never mentioned the snow, never mentioned the night, never mentioned the woman standing alone on courthouse steps. But something had shifted. The second crack came when journalists stopped accepting silence as an answer. Reporters requested court records, then financial disclosures, then trust documentation connected to the father-in-law's estate. What had once been locked behind influence and polite favors was now being examined by people who didn't owe the family anything. A business columnist uncovered irregular asset transfers tied to shell accounts. A local investigative reporter connected those transfers to funds that should have been protected for a minor. Another outlet confirmed that the abandoned property wasn't abandoned at all, but deliberately held, its status misrepresented for years. Each article landed like a controlled burn, not explosive, unavoidable. The Langfords tried to maintain composure. Public appearances were canceled. Charity events postponed out of respect for the situation. Invitations stopped arriving. Board members quietly requested distance. Partnerships that had once relied on the family name began to feel risky. Behind closed doors, panic crept in. The husband found himself answering questions he'd never had to face before. Not from strangers, but from people who had once admired him. What exactly happened that night? Why was your wife out in the snow? Why does the trust documentation contradict your statements? He didn't have good answers, and without his mother's certainty guiding him, he realized how little authority he actually held. The mother-in-law fought harder. She always had. She called in favors, pressured editors, threatened lawsuits, reminded people of donations and influence, but the tone had changed. Where once her calls were returned immediately, now assistants answered. Where once meetings were private, now they were declined. Power only works when people believe it's untouchable. The courts reopened the case under public pressure, not dramatically, procedurally. A new judge was assigned. Independent counsel appointed. A forensic review ordered. The phrase, potential financial misconduct, appeared in an official filing, and the family's legal team finally lost control of the narrative. When the ruling came, it wasn't shouted. It was written. The court acknowledged that evidence had been improperly dismissed, that documentation had been withheld, that the property transfer and trust conditions were valid, that the mother and child had been wrongfully removed from their home and mischaracterized in proceedings. Custody was restored immediately. Access to the trust and assets was returned. The family's objections were overruled. The mother-in-law sat stiff in the courtroom, lips pressed thin, eyes forward. She didn't argue this time. She couldn't. The room no longer belonged to her. The husband stared at the floor. When the judge finished reading, there was no applause. No celebration, just a quiet understanding that something had ended. Outside, cameras waited again, but the young woman didn't stop. She walked past them calmly, her child's hand in hers, shoulders squared. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She had learned that dignity didn't need a microphone. The fallout continued for months. The husband lost his position within the family business, not through scandal, but through restructuring. His reputation fractured. Invitations dried up. He became someone people remembered vaguely, without admiration. The mother-in-law's influence faded faster than she expected. Charities quietly distanced themselves. Boards asked her to step down for optics. Her voice, once commanding, now sounded shrill in empty rooms. The house that had thrown them out went dark. The woman never returned. Instead, she poured her energy into the property they thought would ruin her. Renovations were slow but intentional. Community volunteers appeared. Legal aid clinics reached out. Survivors of similar situations found her story and recognized themselves in it. What began as survival became structure. What began as humiliation became foundation. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through newly cleaned windows, she stood in the doorway of the building and watched people arrive. Women with children, elderly men, travelers with nowhere else to. Go, no one asked her who she was married to. They asked if there was coffee, if there was warmth, if there was help. She answered yes. The powerful had fallen, not into poverty, not into spectacle, but into irrelevance. And the woman they tried to erase had become impossible to ignore. 1 year later, the snow returned, not as violently as that night, not with the same cruelty, but gently. Soft flakes drifting down, coating the ground in quiet white. Cars slowed along the road near the old property, headlights glowing warmly as they turned into a place that no longer looked abandoned. Lights shone from the windows now. The building stood solid, repaired not just with money, but with intention. A sign near the entrance read simply, "Welcome," no name, no explanation, just an invitation. Inside, warmth wrapped around everyone who entered. The smell of soup filled the air. Coats hung neatly along the wall. A few children sat at a table coloring, while an older woman helped them choose crayons. In another corner, a volunteer quietly explained legal forms to a young mother, speaking gently, patiently. The woman moved through the space calmly, confidently. Her posture had changed over the year, not hardened, not arrogant, but steady. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people leaned in. Her child ran past her, laughing, chasing another kid down the hallway. His laughter echoed freely now, unafraid. She watched him for a moment, a small smile touching her lips. This place had started as survival. It had become something else entirely. A shelter, yes, but also a legal aid center. A safe place, a second chance for people who had been pushed aside quietly, politely, efficiently. People didn't come here to beg. They came here to breathe. Late that afternoon, a familiar car pulled into the lot, not sleek anymore. Not impressive, just functional. She noticed it through the window and felt no rush of anger. Only awareness. Her former husband stepped out first. He looked older, thinner, less certain. The weight he used to carry so easily, status, protection, arrogance, was gone. His mother followed. She walked slower than she used to. Her coat was expensive, but it didn't fit the moment the way it once would have. Her eyes scanned the building, taking in the people, the warmth, the quiet order. She didn't look powerful. She looked desperate. They stood outside for a moment, clearly unsure whether to enter. For the first time in their lives, the door wasn't automatically open to them. Finally, they stepped inside. The room didn't stop for them. No one stared. No one whispered. No one made room. They were just people walking into a space they didn't control. The woman noticed them fully now. She didn't rush over. She didn't freeze. She finished helping an older man adjust his coat, then turned and approached them calmly. "Yes," she asked, voice neutral. Her former husband swallowed. We need to talk." She studied his face, not searching for guilt, not hunting for weakness, just seeing him clearly for the first time in a long while. "You can talk," she said, "but not here." She led them to a small office near the back, the same kind of room she once sat in, being told she had no proof, no power, no voice. Now she stood, they sat. The silence was heavy. His mother spoke first, as she always had. "You've made this very difficult for us." The woman didn't react. "We lost everything," the older woman continued, voice tight. "Reputation, stability, people turned on us." The woman nodded once. "People saw the truth." Her former husband looked at the floor. "I made mistakes," he said quietly. "I was afraid. I let things happen." She waited. "I shouldn't have stayed silent." He continued. "I shouldn't have chosen comfort over you, over him." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway, where her child's laughter echoed faintly. "No," she said calmly. "You shouldn't have." The mother-in Law leaned forward. "We're family," she said. "Whatever happened before?" The woman raised her hand gently. "No," she said again. "Family isn't a word you use when it benefits you." The older woman stiffened. "You threw us out into the snow," the woman continued, voice steady, not loud. "You closed the door. You laughed. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision." Silence filled the room. "We need help," her former husband whispered. "We don't have anywhere else to go." The woman studied them both. For a moment, it looked like the past might pull her backward, toward anger, toward triumph, toward revenge. Instead, she chose something else. "I won't hurt you," she said, "but I won't save you either." They looked up. "You don't get access to my life," she continued. "You don't get access to my child, and you don't get to rewrite what you did." She stood. But, she added, "This place is open to everyone who comes honestly." She opened the door. "If you need food, take it. If you need warmth, sit by the heater. If you need legal advice, talk to a volunteer. But you will not control this space." They hesitated. Pride fought desperation. Desperation won. They nodded quietly and stepped out into the main room. Not as royalty, not as victims. Just as people who had finally lost their armor. The woman watched them go, then turned back toward the shelter. Her child ran up to her, throwing his arms around her waist. "Mom, did you see? They made more soup." She laughed softly. "I saw." She knelt and brushed snow from his hair. "Go help them set the table." "Yes, ma'am," he said proudly, racing off. She stood alone for a moment, taking it all in. The warmth, the noise, the life. They had thrown her into the cold. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they had taught her how to build warmth for others. And that was something no one could ever take away.